First called out weak leaders, then said Europe is decaying. Now goes all out for Greenland. Trump slaps 10% tariffs on Europe as US President takes aggressive stand on Europeans.
All right, this moment dates back to a meeting where Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and a lineup of Europe's most powerful leaders were brought together at the White House with President Donald Trump. The optics were striking. Trump seated firmly at one end of the table, European leaders positioned across from him, a visual that many saw as deliberate, projecting authority and control. So what does this image really tell us? What does it reveal about how Donald Trump views Europe, its leadership, its influence, and its place in his world order? Because as the saying goes, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And in this case, it offers a clear starting point to explain Trump's view of Europe. Hello and welcome to another episode of Xplained, brought to you by NewsX. My name is Vineet Malhotra and let's get into this. And this was not just about optics or body language. Donald Trump has repeatedly made his views on Europe clear. In his own words, on multiple occasions, he has openly criticized European leadership, dismissing them as weak and ineffective, as well as, and I quote, decaying. Let's listen in to one instance where he is speaking about EU and his opinions on them.
Most European nations, they're decaying. They're decaying.
Well, he also goes on in this very interview to state that, and I quote, look at the mayor of London. He's a disaster. He's got a totally different ideology than what he is supposed to have, and he has gotten elected because so many new people have come in and elected him. He goes on to give his opinions about other places as well. Listen in.
It's one of those things, but I hate what's happened to London, and I hate what's happened to Paris. I hate when I see it.
Well, not just this, but Trump has outright stated that he views these countries as weak, but they also want to be politically correct. And this proves his feelings for the European Union as a whole. Let's take a quick listen.
Europe, they want to be politically correct, and it makes them weak. That's what makes them weak.
Well, his message has been blunt, that Europe benefits from American power without carrying its own weight. This rhetoric has not been isolated or accidental. It has been a consistent theme in Trump's public statements, speeches, and negotiations, framing Europe not as an equal partner, but as a bloc he believes can be pressurized. And for Donald Trump, these statements were not just strong opinions, they were a precursor to action. Time and again, his criticism of Europe was followed by direct warnings and threats, aimed at applying pressure on allies he believed were not falling in line. Trump consistently framed Europe as a bloc that was taking advantage of the United States, whether on trade, security, or defense spending, and he made it clear that this, in his view, was unacceptable. From questioning Europe's commitment to shared responsibilities to warning of consequences if demands were not met, Trump's language marked a shift from criticism to coercion. This was no longer just about how he spoke about Europe, it was about how he intended to deal with it. And those consequences, in many cases, came in the form of tariffs. And those warnings were not empty. For Donald Trump, tariffs became a key tool to back up his threats against Europe. Under his America First doctrine, Trump moved to impose and threaten tariffs on European goods, framing them as necessary steps to protect American interests. Time and again, Europe was accused of unfair trade practices, with Trump arguing that the transatlantic trade balance was tilted against the United States. On the same, Trump had also stated in one of his press briefings that the United States has massive deficits with the European Union. He said that they don't take any of their farm products or cars. He stated that asked a leader how many Chevrolets or Fords do they see in the middle of Munich, and he claims the answer is none. He states that the EU has abused the United States for years and they can't do that. Let's listen to what he said.
A couple of the leaders, I don't want to use names, but how many Chevrolets or Fords do you see in the middle of Munich? And the answer is none, because they don't take any cars. They don't take anything. So the European has abused the United States for years, and they can't do it.
But for Europe, these moves were seen as more than economic measures. They were viewed as political pressure, a way to force concessions through trade pain. In effect, tariffs became a signal that Trump was prepared to move from rhetoric to real economic consequences in his dealings with Europe. But for Donald Trump, pressure on Europe did not stop at trade. He took aim at the very foundation of Europe's security, NATO. On multiple occasions, Trump publicly questioned the value of the alliance, accusing European countries of not paying their fair share for collective defense. He argued that the United States was carrying a disproportionate burden, while Europe benefited from American military protection. Trump went a step further, warning that US commitment to NATO should not be taken for granted. He repeatedly suggested that if allies failed to meet his demands, America could consider its role or reconsider it, a statement that shook European capitals. At times, he even cast doubt on the core principle of NATO itself, collective defense, raising questions about whether the United States would come to the aid of allies it believed were not doing enough. For Europe, these remarks were unprecedented. NATO had long been seen as untouchable, a guarantee of security and stability since the end of World War II. Trump's words changed that perception. The message was clear. For the first time in decades, Europe was being told that its security could be conditional, subject to demands, pressure, and political calculation. This, however, has not been the first instance that Trump has expressed his opinion so outwardly on the European Union. During Donald Trump's first presidential term, he frequently criticized the EU, particularly on trade issues, portraying it as an unfair competitor to the United States despite its status as a traditional ally. In a July 15, 2018 news interview ahead of his summit with Vladimir Putin, he explicitly stated, and I quote, "I think the European Union is a foe. What do they trade in the US? Now, you wouldn't think of the European Union, but they're a foe." He elaborated that the EU had really taken advantage of the US in trade, while also noting that many member countries were not paying their fair share in NATO defense contributions, with Germany often highlighted as a prime example. And according to John Bolton's 2020 memoir, The Room Where It Happened, Trump repeatedly described the EU as worse than China, only smaller, in private discussions, including during meetings with leaders like Angela Merkel, arguing that the bloc had been formed to take advantage of the US on trade matters. These remarks underscored his view of the EU as an economic adversary that exploited American generosity in security and commerce.
First called out weak leaders, then said Europe is decaying. Now goes all out for Greenland. Trump slaps 10% tariffs on Europe as US President takes aggressive stand on Europeans.